tell me what you do.
It's probably easier to tell you what I used to do. So I used to own a nutritional manufacturing company in Ohio, where we manufactured like grass-fed whey protein. We didn't actually manufacture it. We bought all of our protein from Europe because of all the factory farming done in the U.S. And then so protein and like whey protein and creatine were our two biggest sellers. We were one of the only companies. My old company is still one of the only companies on Amazon that sells Creapure creatine. So you have like creatine that's made in Germany, and you have creatine that's made in China. 95% is made in China. And there's 5% of it's made in Germany. But the German product, the purity is a lot better. There's some actually very dangerous chemicals that are in the Chinese product, and most of the Chinese product is banned in some countries, but not in the U.S. So anyway, so that I ran that company for 15 years. I've always been an entrepreneur, but I don't think I realized I was an entrepreneur until it was, I was in my 40s probably. And so I moved to Mexico. My wife and I couldn't. I was married for 33 years, and my wife and I just couldn't figure out how to get along with each other. And you know, I wasn't giving her what she needed. She wasn't, responding the appropriate way to me, and so we decided to end the marriage. And then she wanted to run the company because I was in Mexico, and it made more sense probably for her to run it. So she's running, the company, and then she's buying me out over a period of time, essentially. So what I do now, so basically, I'm an entrepreneur, and I've had to reinvent myself because I was, manufacturing nutritional products. I was, my skill sets were on manufacturing. I learned skill sets in marketing with Amazon and Google, but now I'm completely doing something different. And it's almost like I hear a clarity now from the universe, and the universe is kind of saying, okay, here's this. This is what makes sense for you to go do. And so it was like I woke up one morning and it was like something hit me, and it's like, you know what? You need to go highlight businesses and real estate and what's going on in Mexico so that people throughout the world, especially Western civilization, know what's going on. Because also, what I see when I look at the data is the whole. I mean, all of the moral issues and drug issues aside in the Western civilization, especially the U.S., you put all that aside, and the data suggests that the United States has, I would say, at max 10 more years of, somewhat good life, although every day is going to get a little worse. And then there's going to be a complete collapse somewhere between 5 and 10 years. So I feel almost like I've got a calling to warn people about what I see and what the data shows, and then at the same time say, okay, it's not the end of the world. Start preparing for a life outside of the United States because that's probably going to be your best option when things go down. So I do real estate shows where I highlight different houses. In Mexico, we have a lot of development properties. They call them pre-ventas here. Venta just means sale, and pre is just pre-sale. But I use an attorney. I use an attorney here in Playa del Carmen that vets all of the developers because the last thing I want to do is promote a property that goes under or takes 2 years longer or even a year longer to build than what they committed to. So I get developers that reach out to me and said, "Hey, we'd like you to promote our property." I'm like, "Okay, I'd love to do that. I need you to submit all your documentation to my attorney," and I connect them with the attorney, and then the attorney does their due diligence. They call it due diligence here, so they do the standard due diligence. But then the attorney I use, they also use artificial intelligence, and they use to like scour the web to look for negative feedback related to the company and the individuals. And then they also do a fair market value analysis. You get kind of a feeding frenzy going on with some of these developments where they might have 64 units, and all but two of them are sold, and they're the last two, and they've got them priced in like $500,000, say, but the fair market value might be $350,000. So they do the analysis on that and they make sure everything looks good, and then they'll actually certify them. Then once they're certified, they come to me. So I get a lot of that. And then I split commissions with all the realtors. So I have realtors, like a network of realtors throughout Mexico, and I get a couple different. So I get different scenarios. Like people will come to me and say, "Hey, I mean, literally, I've had two people now with 1,000 acres of beachfront property in Baja California, and they're like, can you help me, sell this property?" And I said, "Okay, yes." And then I basically look at my network of realtors, and in this particular case, I looked at only the ones in Cabo because the properties were very, I mean, 1,000 acres of beachfront. I mean, you're talking like 2, 3 kilometers of beachfront property. So I vetted several realtor or brokers in Cabo, and there was one that kind of stood out amongst all the other ones. So then I connect her with that broker, and then we're off to the races, getting all the documentation to get those properties listed. And those are both still in the works. Like that's been like 2 or 3 weeks, and they're still trying to get all the documentation, everything together. And then once that's together, I'll fly out. I'll bring a videographer. We'll do drone coverage. I'll talk about the property, and I'll help them promote it. But so I do that. I also connect people with, like, a lot of different things. Like if you're moving to Mexico and you have, how do you get residency? What do you need to do to get a bank account? How do you set up a corporation? How do you move money? What do you do with household goods? I mean, all of that, I basically give them kind of the inside scoop on what's going on. And, on the money moving part, it used to be people would lose like 4 to 5% of their money when they transfer it from the US here. And I've got a product now that pretty much eliminates any cost. Like, so if the market value like today is 19.81 pesos to the dollar, or pesos to the dollar, you get 19.81 minus 2%, but then the guy pays you 5% interest on your money. So anyway, it works out where you get really good money transfer rates. So it's kind of like I'm like I view myself as a facilitator, a connector. Um, I just plug people into the right resources because, like for instance, when I got residency, it cost me $5,000. Now, when somebody comes and they want residency, I connect them with an attorney that charges, roughly $2,000. So they're getting the best services at the best price. And same thing with like realtors. If they want to look at a property, I'll ask them a few questions like, do you need financing? Because if they're using financing, only certain realtors have good connections with financing. And so I just kind of try to steer them into the right direction. Some realtors specialize in properties that are, studio, 1 bedroom, 2 bedrooms. Others specialize in properties that are, $1 million, 5, 6, 7 bedrooms. So I depending on what they're looking for, I pair them with who I think the best realtor is in that area that can help them.
So are you a realtor, or do you do more of, I guess, for lack of better words, more of the bird dog side?
Yeah, I'm not a realtor. I'm a lead generator for realtors, and I have partnerships with realtors throughout Mexico. And then the other thing that I don't know if Japan, where you are, is the same, but here in Mexico and the rest of Latin America, it's like all of Latin America, there's no MLS. So in the US, you have an MLS, you have Zillow, and every property that's, on the market is in that system. Here in Mexico, that's not the case. Um,
So then, not to cut you off here, so I'm not a realtor. I work with quite a lot of realtors as well in the Middle Tennessee area, kind of the southeast. We do work in Alabama as well. And what you find, people that aren't licensed will usually say, like, there's really no need because what they're doing is plugging it in online at this point, right? And it's really made a substantial amount of realtors lazy, for lack of better words, utilizing the MLS. Do you see that the realtors without that resource kind of just have another edge to them because they have to?
no, I don't see that. I mean, because so what happens here, and it's the same throughout Latin America, is somebody will go, they'll the homeowner or the property owner will somehow vet and pick the realtor that they think is best for them. And then that company will list the property. Most times that company will put the property on their website, but then they don't share that listing with anyone. So, and then you have some other realtors that have a network of other brokers, and then they might share within their network of people. You might have 4 or 5 brokers that share. But literally, like I've looked at several properties and they're listed by a company, but they're not like public. And they'll literally tell me, don't, this, you can't bring in another realtor here. I'll split a commission with you because I'm getting the whole 6%, but I'm not going to bring in another person and split it 3 ways. So I don't know that I don't know that to me, the whole listing process is broken here. Like one of the things that I'm working on is I'm building like an MLS type system. So we're building a Zillow type system for Mexico and the rest of Latin America. And we're using artificial intelligence. We're going to go scrape. We're going to crawl all the websites that sell real estate, and we're going to scrape them and consolidate the data and use AI to follow up via WhatsApp, most likely, with all the listings to make sure they're up to date, accurate. And then, but that's and then the other thing that we're thinking about doing is offering a service with that allows people to list their property directly through us for, say, a fixed cost. So say you charge $2,000 to list your property with us. We list it until it's sold, and then you pay your 6%. You still pay the 6%, but you pay that now to whoever brings the buyer. Because in this part of Mexico, you have these development projects, and those developers are paying 6 to 8%. So if somebody contacts a realtor in the area, the realtors are financially incented to sell those preventas or those development properties because they're making 6 to 8%. So I think by doing what I'm talking about, I can get houses on the same scale, and then you'll get a lot more action on properties when they get listed, and they won't have to sit around so long. Anyway, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. It's an emerging market to a large degree.
Yeah.
Jumping back a little bit to your story, I've heard you say that you were looking for peace when you originally went into Mexico. Was that I'm assuming that your situation with your wife wasn't the only kind of thing that you were looking for peace from. Is there more to that story?
In that particular story, it was my wife and we didn't get along very well there at the end, and I just needed, I mean, I needed solitude. I needed quiet. I needed peacefulness, and we had vacationed to this area of Mexico several times during our marriage, and this was the only place that I ever felt like I could really relax and have peace, and I could just sit on the beach here and just chill and just get it one with nature and really enjoy myself. Where nowhere else in the world I was able to do that. I mean, I had a business that was very stressful as well, I would say, but I don't know that that wasn't really the driver for peace. Yeah, I tell people when I moved to Mexico, I had no tattoos. Now my arms are, both arms are covered. I got tattoos here on my legs, and my tattoos are like a reminder to me of what's important and what I value. So when I wake up, it's the first thing that I see. And by the time my tattoos were done, my marriage was done.
So what is important to you, and what do you value?
Like, okay, so like on this arm, I don't know if you can see it. Um, Boy, you probably can't see it at all. But I have right here is a clock. So there's a clock here, and a candle here, and then up here I have a Grim Reaper. So this all represents time. I'm getting old. I don't have a lot of time left. I want to make the most of the time that I have left. On my hand, I have what's called a Valknut, and a Valknut is a Viking symbol to honor somebody that's fallen in battle. And so my sister was got messed up with heroin, and a guy that did heroin and kind of got her hooked on it. He most likely killed her, but her body was never discovered. They've never found her body. All we know is she's in fact dead. Um, but so that's a remembrance to my sister because she was important to me. And then on this hand, I've got just the Zen symbol for peace. I mean that's the big thing. So time being valuable, my sister, peace are the big ones. And then this was like this tattoo here is basically me as Poseidon, and I've got like heavy seas here. So it's like this is me as Poseidon. I've been in heavy seas. I'm really just looking for peace. So that's what my tattoos are, pretty much.
And they all came after getting into Mexico.
Yeah.
Why tattoos to express this to yourself? I know this is not something I anticipated even going into, but yeah, what about that? Like,
I don't know because I never wanted any tattoos, and all of a sudden, it was like something inside me was screaming, "You got to get your message. You got to figure out what's important to you, and you got to live that importance every day." And I don't know, so it just compelled me to get the tattoos from myself, so that I always look at them. I always see the time. I always see my sister. I always see the peace. I'm just okay. These are my priorities.
okay, that makes sense. You mentioned it briefly earlier. You said whispers from the universe, and now you're kind of going into this realm, and you mentioned your message. What would you say your message is? And you again, you talked about it briefly, but what is the message you're trying to convey? Because like it's very obvious, right, from the outside looking in, you do developments and real estate and things along those lines, but you really cover quite and promoting Mexico, but you cover quite a lot more than that, and 99% of people on the online space would say stay in your lane, but you don't really do that. Or I don't want to say you don't have a lane, but do you know what I'm trying to convey here by this question? Like, what is your primary message?
Yeah, I mean, I think my primary message is, people need to wake up and see what's going on throughout Western civilization. So it doesn't matter if you're from Canada, the U.S., Western Europe, Australia. I mean, all of Western civilization right now is undergoing a huge moral decay. And at the same time, they're going through huge financial systems. Like for instance, in the United States, the government says they have a $35 trillion shortfall. Everybody knows that number, right? But there's another $50 trillion of debt, or no, there's another $150 trillion of debt that the federal government owes Social Security and Medicare because they've been borrowing since 1980 from those coffers. So when you add those two numbers together, the United States is 185 trillion in debt, and our assets are now lower than our liabilities, and we're the only country in the world that has a negative net worth, but yet we're still spending money like drunken sailors. And so that's going to and the only thing that's keeping everything afloat right now is the petrodollar. So and it's not now, you can't even call it a petrodollar because we've lost that status. And so now it's really because we had the petrodollar status for so long, we have a big reserve currency in all of these countries. So like 65%, a few years ago, 65% of reserve currencies were in US dollars. That was in like 2008. Today it's 53%. And everybody in the world is selling US currencies, and they're basically changing them for gold right now. And it's a slow process because if all these countries all of a sudden sold their all of that U.S. dollars, then it would tank the dollar immediately. But China is actively selling. I think it's about $35 billion a year of their currencies. But pretty much, OPEC has vowed to get out of the dollar completely. Iraq has made it illegal to U.S. dollars are illegal in Iraq. So everybody's trying to de-dollarize, and as these reserve currencies shrink, we're going to go. We already went from 65 to 53, and then we're going to go to 49 to 47 to 40. At some point, it just free falls. So at some point, the rest of the world panics on the dollar, and then everybody's just going to sell it for what they can before it's worthless. But so I don't know. So that's probably my biggest message is wake up. Even if you can fix the moral decay, the drug addiction, even if you can fix those things, there's no way to fix this money issue, this debt issue, and this collapsing dollar. So and I don't know. So I'm trying to warn people that hey, this is what's going on. This is what the data says, and the only thing keeping us afloat is this reserve currency status, which we're obviously losing. So I don't. I mean, so that's probably my biggest message. Other than that, I'm completely unscripted. I never prepare any kind of notes or anything. What I do is I will have topics that I want to talk about, and so a lot of times I'll give those to the guys interviewing me on the stuff we do on a weekly basis. Say, okay, here's some questions that feel free to ask me anything you want, but try to ask me these questions, and then I just answer them. I just nothing is scripted for me. To me, that doesn't seem right. It's awkward for me to do scripted stuff. Like even if I was to type it out myself, it would just be, and I had a teleprompter, it would be very awkward for me to do that. So I just shoot from the hip, and I try to talk about things from a data, base perspective. What does the data show? And then talk about what I see. Because like in Mexico, the data tells you that there's a lot of homicides in Mexico and that it's very dangerous. But you live here, and it's not at all what the data suggests. I'm not saying that those homicides don't occur. I'm sure they occur, but they're happening within a very it's kind of like gang violence in the United States. When gang members are killing gang members, the rest of the population, as long as they're not impacted, they don't really feel insecure. And in Mexico, it's kind of like there's a lot of violence, but it's pretty much cartel on cartel, and or it's somebody doing stupid shit like you would not believe the amount of waiters that I've seen taken out because they sell drugs to the tourists. So the tourist comes in, and the waiter's like, "Oh, I got you." They want some drugs, and the waiter's like, "Oh, I got you." And then usually the cartels will come in and warn them once, and then they keep doing it. And then it's like they don't warn them a second time. So you see a lot of stupid stuff. Um, but like that's why I always say there's two sets of laws in Mexico. You've got the government laws, and you got the cartel laws, and most people know the cartel laws, and you just don't mess with that system.
I've been here almost 10 years in Japan, and I saw the exact same thing and realities. And I use the word reality on purpose. When you're talking about data driven, right? Like, I just don't think people realize, and I don't know yet if it's that they are trapped by the celebrity gossip, if they are trapped mentally through normacy bias, right? Or if they're trapped through narcissism, because America has this weird narcissism where they think if America turns into Mad Max, it's the same thing as the world turning into Mad Max. And I can't think of anything more narcissistic, right, than to think, and if you bring up, right, but look at BRICS. Look how fast BRICS is moving. I think even the people in this realm, in the macroeconomic realm, really knew and been paying attention to this because it's not a new idea, right? But it is accelerating super fast. And obviously the military developments over the last couple years, whether you agree or disagree, is only speeding that process up.
No, that's a good point. I think Iran's manufacturing drones now for the Houthis, and they're from what I'm understanding, the United States they've almost taken out an aircraft carrier with their drones. In the United States, the military is having a very tough time defending against these drones, and you're talking from a very small militia group. If they could take out an aircraft carrier, um, they haven't done that yet, but it looks like they have that possibility to do. Yeah, it's the whole warfare game is changing, and we no longer have the men in the United States to fight a war. So unless it's so the only thing we can do is have a technological war, and if we continue to lose our edge on that, then we have no advantage at all.
And the it's not just the men. It's the reality that we won World War II in partnership with another superpower, which I don't need to go into the history of the politics of that. But one thing I always talk about that I love is if you look at the Marvel movies and you look at the original Captain America movie, the history behind that is actually remarkably accurate, right? So if you think back to that movie, like one of the things that they have him doing when he's first created as a superhero is selling war bonds to the American business owners. Right. And then you find out how many of the B-52 bombers were created by Ford and the American manufacturing. And you kind of put these pieces of the puzzle together and you go, oh, well, other than the partnered superpower, which didn't believe in the bourgeoisie middle class manufacturing, America's power was only done through the willingness of entrepreneurs and business owners to bet on America. Outside of that, it wouldn't have happened. And you're seeing this inevitability, right, in every facet. Whether you're talking about the drugs and you're talking about the markets and the currency wars that have been happening and are currently happening. I just don't think people, when you say wake up, are really paying attention to that. These are inevitabilities. These are realities. We can do a lot of things to start to slow down the ship, the correct things, to get on the right track, for sure. But I said this a couple of days ago, and I think people think I am pro-America. I love America, like a lot. And I love the freedoms America used to quote Dan Carlin, that America used to cherish and the freedoms that we used to have, and all of these different things. But I'm telling America as loud as I can recently, you have a choice and you don't get a third option. You can choose to be this hegemonic superpower of the world, or you can choose your freedoms. You don't get both. And because the math doesn't make sense to get both anymore. There was a time where we could, right? So within this changing environment, this world environment, oh, by the way, there are significantly more US dollars outside of the United States economy than there are inside the United States economy. So what people don't realize is this is exponential, because when those international corporations, which do not care about America, want to flood the US market, whether the government stops printing money or not, right? Inflation doesn't go down, it goes up. And if we're in a rock and a hard place, because if we brought manufacturing back to the United States, that increases velocity, which is nothing more than how fast dollars change hands, which increases inflation. So this is an inevitability. Even if you get America made again, you're going to increase inflation. If you don't, the international multinational corporations are going to flood the US dollar. Like, it is not, this is a reality. So,
and even if they make it internal, then the prices are going to be sky high, and the U.S. can't compete with China or Mexico in manufacturing.
And on that, that's kind of what I was going to get to next here, is one thing that really caught my attention a long time ago, almost a decade ago, was the rise of Southeast Asia, not China. But this is, for the record, I had never heard of Peter Zion before, but I did product development and import-export and shipped to the United Kingdom and shipped to Europe and shipped to the United States and did a lot of that. And I was seeing the rise of Cambodia, because the biggest issue with these developing markets is they weren't able to hit the quality to quantity ratio. And some of these places are just getting online, right? And Mexico's been there for a while, so this is where I'm about to go. But like Cambodia, for example, is just now getting to the mass production level. And you're really starting to see a lot of Japanese my running shoes, I run distance. My running shoes are made in Cambodia. That is unheard of 7 years ago. Not made in China, made in Cambodia, right? And when you tell anyone, I would say like slightly older than me, that Cambodia is on the verge of becoming a powerhouse in the mass production world, they're like, no way. And I'm like, I'm already seeing it with food supply and how clean it is. And it's like, I could go down this rabbit hole. But in terms of Mexico, right, there's 3 superpowers that I think in terms of manufacturing that are really coming: India, Cambodia, and Mexico. And India doesn't have the infrastructure quite yet, and obviously neither does Cambodia. But One thing that you talked about is Mexico is building massive infrastructure at the moment. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's interesting because when you're, I mean, living in Mexico, I'm seeing government projects that are huge. I mean, they built a Mayan train. I believe it's like over 1,500 kilometers that they're connecting. Three different. I think it's three different states, maybe five different states, but they're connecting basically all of the old Mayan civilizations. And then there's discussion about tying that into, because that train goes almost to the border of Belize, and now they're talking about tying it into Central America because there's an old track there in Central America and having that opened up. And then in Tulum they built a brand new airport. I don't know how many billions of dollars that was. They built a super highway through Baja, and I think there's another one that they're putting into like near Acapulco and Puerto Vallarta. I believe that one's done as well. Here in Quintana Roo, they're putting up massive freeways between here and, like, say, Merida and some different places. Um, what else? Oh, they're putting in a transcontinental railroad to compete with the Panama Canal. And then AMLO, the president of Mexico, was able to get two north-south rails into the United States opened up. So it looks like they can take cargo containers now, offload them in these ports, put them on the transcontinental highway, basically, or railway, and then ship them up either to the west coast or the east coast of the United States via rail. And
So
so,
hold on, real sorry. That I don't want to brush over that because I don't think people pay attention to how huge that would be. So what you're saying is utilizing NAFTA, right? They can send their logistics or the freight into to Mexico, and then once these rails are completed, tax free through NAFTA or whatever, right? Can now ship it to the logistics final mile companies.
yeah, I don't know if it's going to be tax. I don't know if I don't know the tax implications. I mean, it's possible that they're able to say, okay, no, this is coming from China or India or whatever, and it's not made in Mexico, so we're not going to give it the same treatment. I mean, so I can't talk to that, but I can talk to the what they're doing and the efficiencies that they're going to have by doing that. It's going to speed up, the transportation into the United States significantly.
So the with the competition of the Panama Canal, how successful do you think that will be? Like how quick to adopt do you think the companies are going to be?
What I didn't realize is the Panama Canal has been operating at like half capacity for the past 5 years because the lake is getting dry. So I think as soon as they come online, they're going to have, it's going to be almost at 100% capacity within a very short order because it's going to be a lot less expensive. It's going to be faster. And, they're going to offload right there so the ship doesn't have to go through the canal and then up to the United States. The ship can just offload on either coast, pull out, and then rail takes it all the way into the U.S. In some cases, other cases, they might, if they have to cut through, they'll have another ship on the other side, maybe taking it. But yeah, I think it'll happen very fast.
So it sounds like this is not just a one or two, one off here. It sounds like there's quite a lot happening simultaneously that are all putting Mexico into the place. And I've heard you say that Mexico is being, right on the verge of being a United States post World War II.
Yes.
I mean, how much of that is headline and how much of that do you fervently believe that they genuinely are on the verge of becoming a potential superpower player?
I don't know that they'll ever be what I would call a superpower because I don't see Mexico ever putting together a military to kind of to wants to control the world. And so they're using their military now mostly internally, and I think that's a smart thing for them to do. But it's what's interesting in Mexico is the GDP is predicted right now. I believe it's like the 12th largest economy in the world, and it was just a few years ago it was 15, so it's moving up. And it's projected, I think PricewaterhouseCoopers projected it to be number seven by 2050, which is a little bit off, but it's going to go from 12 to seven. And then the other thing that's unique about Mexico is the stated GDP right now is roughly 2 trillion, and there's probably another trillion in the GDP number that comes from the cartels and all of the tourists and all the cash transactions that take place here. So the economy is already, much bigger than what people think. But when you look at, the fundamentals, when you look at the unemployment rate, I mean, unemployment in Mexico is under 3%. The average wage now for a Mexican worker is 16,000 US a year. That's average. Now I know in the US it's a lot higher, but I mean it's not that it's a lot. The cost of living here is a lot lower as well. The average age of the worker or the population is much lower. So you have a very young workforce, and you have a pipeline of younger kids to fill that workforce for the next 50 years. So I just see all of these things happening, and the debt to GDP, even though the GDP is understated by 50% roughly, well, I guess it would be 33%. But the debt to the stated GDP is less than 50%. So they're spending all this money on infrastructure, and they're able to keep it paid off, and they're not going in the hole on the spending. So everything that, and then on the manufacturing side, they've got a huge, they're already the number one importer of manufactured goods into the United States, and now their pipeline is growing. So, like for instance, 2 years ago, Mexico was seeing about 34 billion a year in. So this is 22. So 2022, Mexico was seeing like 34 billion a year from foreign countries investing in Mexico, primarily in manufacturing. In 2024, that number will exceed $100 billion. And so next year it could be 150, it could be $200 billion, and a dollar in Mexico probably goes 50% or more further than a dollar in the United States, because labor's less money. You don't have all the bureaucracy of the government organizations. You don't have the unions that are, driving wages, to unrealistic levels. And so they're able to get a lot done with, the money that they're getting. So I would even go as far to say that, $20 billion in Mexico is probably equivalent to 40 to 50 billion or more in the US when you're looking at spending on infrastructure. So all of these things are happening, and they're not going in the red. The new president, I believe, will start enacting some more social programs. Even though Mexico is considered a socialistic country, the United States is far more socialistic. And you don't have drug addicts in Mexico like you have in the United States. And I believe that's primarily because if you do drugs in Mexico and you don't go to work, you don't make any money, and you're gonna die pretty much. You're not gonna live very long if you're not going to work and not making any money. So people do drugs in Mexico like other countries, but they get up and go to work the next day, and they're functioning members of society.
Yeah, and I had somebody was talking about Colombia and the real estate. Even if it's in a bubble, it's not, and I'm sure Mexico is the same thing I wanted to ask about. But even if there was a bubble, hypothetically, and things did decrease, the amount of debt that people take on is so substantially low that it wouldn't have the same impact as it does in the States, where every single person, every business is levered as much as they possibly can, right? So I could imagine the social safety net is a little less. So if you don't take care of yourself, you're not going to get loans to bail yourself out if you do those drugs to not get up. So that's actually one of the things, though, I wanted to ask was on the note of foreign investment reaching over 100 billion. Do you know what that currently is now as we go into September? What that number is?
They reported it was 45 billion through June, and so I haven't seen a report come out, but so if you if you just said, okay, we get 45 the first half, we get 45 the second half, that gets you to 90. But the way it's progressing, that's why I say it'll be should be 100 billion this year.
Some of it we've probably already talked about. What would be some of the biggest reasons that you would recommend, and you talk about this quite a lot, pour money into Mexico, right? Because I think, again, in the West, we have these weird ideas that are, I truly believe, deliberately placed within us, in other words, propaganda, about investing into Mexico, or what that even means, or what that looks like, and how you even do that. Right. So obviously one of your tenets is that you plan to help people and assist them in a more efficient and more dependable way than people may be able to do on their own. But what would you say are some of the biggest arguments to pour that money into Mexico in all sectors? Because it sounds like this isn't just like, go into avocados or farming, right? This is like across the board.
Yeah, and what's interesting is I've traveled to several cities throughout Mexico, and I'm trying to get so right now Mexico has 130 million people. If you look at all the construction that's happening, I mean, every city I believe in Mexico is growing. Like even Mexico City, when I was there in one small colonial, I guess they call it. There were probably 30 high rises going up in Mexico City. In Tulum, there's like 400 to 500 developments that are going up. I think Cancun has a little over 100. There's about 40 to 50 in Playa, but they're everywhere. So they're in Puerto Vallarta, they're in Nayarit, they're in Puerto Penasco, Acapulco, Mazatlan. I mean, the Emerita is exploding. Bacalar is growing. I mean, every area of Mexico is growing. So just by what looks to be the construction of housing right now, it's like Mexico's preparing for a population of probably 150 million people in the next 5 to 10 years. Um, the state that I'm in, Quintana Roo, is doubling in population every 5 years. So a year ago there were, I think, 2.5 million people in the state, and in 4 more years there will probably be 5 million people here. So so everything is growing. You're getting people that are migrating here, and land is getting snatched up left and right. But there's still some good nuggets out there of land throughout Mexico. But it'll be gone here in, say, Tulum, probably in the next 4 or 5 years. You won't have any of that prime real estate, and then all the real estate will be further away from the ocean. And you couple that with all of the financial indicators that are suggesting Mexico is going to do extremely well, and the fact that people are not financing homes here. Most of the homes are paid for in cash. Eventually, and the credit markets are starting to open already, but eventually these credit markets are going to be the same in Mexico as they are in the United States. And when the credit markets open up here, then property values are going to go significantly higher. So I think that's why I would invest in real estate. And even the same thing is true on the commercial side of real estate. So I've talked to a commercial broker yesterday out of Guadalajara that's building essentially an industrial park next to the Guadalajara airport, and that airport is doubling in capacity as well. They're putting in a new runway, new terminals, um, and they've got an industrial park right next to it, and so you have the ability to invest in a warehouse there, or a property to put a warehouse on, for a price that in a few years is going to seem like nothing, because it's going to probably go up 5 or 6 times in the next 10 years. So it's just all kinds of things are happening here, and the wages are going up. Mexico has the fastest growing middle class now of any country in the world. Um, I don't know, just there's not a lot of negative stuff. People will say it's the cartels. Or, I get people say the cartels are going to steal your houses, and that's, to my knowledge, has never happened. I've never heard of that happening. And people think that you can't buy property in Mexico, and it's like, well, if what you do to buy the best way to buy property in Mexico is you set up a corporation, and then you basically buy your house through the corporation. So you have a Mexican corporation, and then that corporation can own the property directly. So that is one of the things people can do. There's other ways to do it as well, but there's just a lot of good reasons I can see and not a lot of bad reasons.
American cities are bleeding people. They're leaving, they're fleeing, I think is a better word.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you said every city is growing in Mexico, and it's kind of the opposite.
I met two guys today that follow me, and I was going to the gym, and one of them like was right by. He was coming out of a condo complex right where I was parked. He is retired LAPD and moved here because he was tired of living in LA and all the crime and everything that's happening there, and two, just his quality of life, his living expenses are much lower here, even though he's living in one of the most beautiful areas of the world. Um, and then I found it. Then in the gym, another guy that follows me introduced himself. Him and his wife just moved here, and they had the same kind of comments to say. And I said, like, how long you been here? And they've been here. Both guys have been here about 2 years, and they both had the same sentiment. They both follow me. So that I said, what's your opinion on living here as far as safety and stuff go? And they go, and they said, we agree with pretty much everything that you've ever said about Mexico. And so I'm just giving my perspective, and I know people have different perspectives, but for the most part, everybody I talk to thinks life is much better and much safer in Mexico.
So most people, right, they kind of get into this is worldwide, by the way. This is when I was living, longer term in the UK. It's the same thing. People get into their UK bubble, and then people in Spain, when I was living, they get into their Spain bubble, and then the US. I think obviously it's pretty clear that it's more than most places. It's surrounded by natural oceans. Probably the worst second language, third, fourth, fifth language learners in the world that I could probably guess is native born, American citizens, U.S. American citizens. One thing for me that really caught my attention was probably for different reasons than other people was when 2020 happened, right? My wife is Japanese. There is no world where Quinton Sanicola is a Japanese citizen. They don't want me here to be a Japanese citizen. Visa residency, not a problem. But what really caught my attention here, and my son is a dual citizen of both, but what caught my attention is when 2020 happened, very few people realize, first of all, of any first world country, in my opinion, Japan handled it the best. Maybe Sweden was better because they did nothing, but Japan would be like just below them. So I would have people sending me nonsense headlines that I'm like, hey man, I don't need your news. I live here. I know what's happening. I actually have businesses here that were never told to stop doing business. What caught my attention is the only thing that they shut down was the international border. And in the very, very beginning, first 2 weeks of that, they even shut down the border for residents, which is what I am, not a citizen. And I was in the States, so I did a lot of traveling during that 2020 time. Plane tickets were cheap, and I was able to go back and forth because of the properties and so on, so on. I had this realization that me and my wife must share citizenship somewhere, full stop. Because they have any of these countries, you're a guest there as a resident rather than having a passport. And when you talk about these changes and the safety and whatnot, me and my wife are very much so looking at South America and some of those different areas. Haven't dove as deep as I probably will after this conversation into Mexico, but I think it's been kind of like a secret, but like a open secret about Panama being amazing. Obviously, you have Melee. I probably messed his Melee down in Argentina, making big moves in a very short amount of time. The data coming out of there is like, man, this can be fixed very quickly if you just let up off the gas on some of this totalitarianism, right? And just chill out and let people do their thing. But you're seeing this, it sounds like to me that Mexico is a big player in that realm. So not just the Panamas, the Belize.
Yeah, the two bright are there. I have three bright stars, I think, for Latin America. So I would put Mexico at number one, probably El Salvador at number two, and Argentina at number three. And the reason for Argentina at number three is they've went through some of the worst, economic times that are imaginable, and they suffered at the hands of extreme socialism. So now, like in the U.S., most of your younger generation are socialist or communist, and they vote that way. In Argentina, because they've suffered for so many years with all these social programs and wasteful government spending, that the younger generations are the conservative. They're more conservative than the older generations. So that's telling me that this type of government is probably going to be in place for another 50 years or more in Argentina, and so things should continue to get better. I think Malay has like cut the bleeding, so to speak. There's a lot of room for improvement, but when I was in Argentina, it was interesting because even though because I was just in Argentina a couple of weeks ago, actually like a week ago, and you wouldn't really know. I mean, you still had people out there spending money, shopping. I mean, it wasn't like a ghost town. I mean, it was pretty. I was in Cordoba, and I heard, I've heard Buenos Aires is even, more active. But people are still going to dinner. People are going to parties. People are shopping. I mean, it wasn't as bad now as what you would think. So it's already getting a lot better. But you can get really good deals on property there right now as well. So property is never going to be as cheap in Argentina as it is right now because they've had so much inflation. And then number two, El Salvador. I don't know if what's funny is I always say that if you're in the United States, there's like a shield across Mexico, and you never hear of what's going on south of the border unless it's a negative, cartel type issue. Then they explode that all over the world news. But in coast or in El Salvador, they had the highest homicide rate in the world, like by far, it was the highest homicide rate in the world. They now have one of the lowest homicide rates in the world. So their homicide rate in El Salvador, I think, is like one third or less than what the U.S. reports. And they did that because the new president signed an executive order and essentially put everybody in prison that had a gang tattoo. And within a very short time frame, crime disappeared. And so, so that's another area where property values are very depressed because you've had so many years of, criminal activity going on, and now all of that's changing, and so you have really good property values there, and things are going to continue to look better for them. And they've also this new president in El Salvador invested heavily government money heavily in crypto, and they now have enough crypto dollars to pay off their Federal Reserve and get rid of the Federal Reserve. Which, if the U.S. could ever get rid of the Federal Reserve, that would be a big accomplishment. So not having the Federal Reserve to run people into debt all the time would be a big deal,
including the U.S. government. But so then what you're seeing with these stars, right? These three North Stars that you had mentioned, is a long history of not going in the right direction and then very quickly turning that around for improvement. Do you see America doing now? There are certain inevitabilities, but I can't stress enough, if America would give up their hegemonic superpower and choose freedoms wisely, they'll gain that superpower back in 2 generations, maybe faster. And it's just, we've seen this time and time again, going back to that example of Captain America. What can happen when people are inspired, not tearing it down, the builders, right? And do you see America turning it around, or do you see it as an inevitability?
So I think the United States has two problems. So when you look at the financial data for the United States and you compare it to Argentina, it's actually worse in the United States. The only thing that's keeping it propped up is this reserve currency status that they still have. And so I think the drug addiction stuff could be managed or fixed. I think the moral decay that we're seeing, like I'm sure you've seen the videos, especially in California, where people are going in and looting, stores. and then stores are closing up, and cities are turning into ghost towns. Um, and even in like rural Ohio, you have to worry about, they call them meth heads breaking into your house, or people addicted to, pain pills breaking into your house to steal stuff that they can sell. And so I think those are fixable for sure. I think. I mean, it would take a completely different, set of, enforcement of laws, we'll just say. But I think all of that's fixable. What I don't think is fixable is the debt that the United States has, and once they lose that petrodollar, it's going to be a holy, it's going to be holy hell in the United States. So yes, they can fix the moral issues, they can fix the criminal stuff, the drug addiction, I think, but I don't see, maybe there's somebody smarter than me that says, oh no, this is how you solve for a debt that's 6 times your GDP. But you know, I don't know how you do that. I really don't. I mean, I know people. The way you do it is you inflate the dollar so that the dollar is worth essentially 1/20th of the value. So then your debt is worth 1/20th of the value, right? You can do it that way, or you can, kill everybody over the age of 65 that's drawing Social Security, and that would save you 150 trillion. So outside of killing the older population, or inflating the dollar, I don't see any other alternatives to get out of that debt issue. But maybe somebody smarter than me has a better solution. I don't know. I mean, I've heard people say, well, the military will force people to use U.S. dollars. It's like I don't see that happening. So there's another conspiracy theory in the U.S. that Clinton signed some executive order into law that allows all of the Federal Reserve debt to be washed away. So essentially, what that means is anybody that has any kind of loan, whether it's a car loan, home loan, business loan, all of that goes away. Okay, then that helps a lot, but you're still 100 and 85 trillion in debt with the federal debt and the Social Security. So those I don't see how to get out of that.
I'm gonna look into that one. I don't either. I mean, but you see this worldwide in terms of national debt everywhere, which is why all of these sovereign families and nations are buying gold as fast as they can, and they don't have to report it the way we do, right? So it is exponentially growing. So the only way to judge it is basically in that giant pool of sovereign, right, wealth. But so. Oh man. Okay. So talk to me here. It would be unfair to talk about the American corruption and to not at least bring up, some of the elephants in the room here. I'll go to the big one first, and then we can bust a few of these myths and just kind of move forward with certain realities to deprogram people. One thing that isn't deniable, that is quite crazy, which is quite, I think, look, this political climate in the U.S. is wild. It's undeniable. We're seeing things that have never been happened. We have candidates that have not won a single primary vote that are like running. We've seen, attempts on lives, for lack of better words. I'm trying to avoid certain words here. We've seen wildness. In the Mexico presidential election, there were 27 candidates that were killed. We can be honest that, like, to an American, even in this political climate, 27 candidates, that's wild, right? Which just fuels the propaganda of Mexico is unsafe. Now, you had mentioned ex-police officers that feel even safer. Talk to me about that. Like, how do people rectify that if they wanted to put investments?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, because what's funny is not. I meet people, like a lot of people from Tijuana, that feel safer in Tijuana than they do in San Diego. And I'm like, how? And they're like, well, I can walk the streets at all hours downtown Tijuana, and I don't have to worry about, getting mugged or beaten or anything like that. But in the United States, when they're in San Diego, they didn't feel very safe. So, you have that. I mean, I wouldn't be a politician in Mexico for anybody. So there's certain, hazards with certain positions. It's no. a secret, I don't think, that you have a lot of corruption in the government in Mexico. And so when you get into a government position, you can make a shit ton of money that's not reported. Um, and in the United States, you don't see it as directly, but it's probably I would say the corruption is worse in the United States because you have the elites basically making all the decisions. You have the big war machine that every time they have a chance to go to war, then all of the people that need to vote for it are always in bed and together, and they're voting. It's the only thing that they can agree on is war, basically, are politicians, and it's because they're getting money from the people that are making the money from the war. So those people are feeding their campaign funds, and so in order to keep their campaign funds fat, they have to go along with those types of things. So you still have this, you still have corruption. It's just at a higher level and a different level in the United States, and it's not as personal. But if you were to look at how many people the United States government kills every year, and you try to contrast that with how many people the cartel kills in Mexico, there's no comparison. I mean, the United States is killing probably 1,000 people to every one person the cartel kills. We're just doing it in Ukraine or Syria or Libya, years ago, or Ethiopia. I mean, we're doing it in other areas, so the American people don't see it, but it's still happening.
If America did put the military on the southern border, look, the border is a problem. You can't have a country without borders. But if they did do that, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I had a business in the United States, and prior to COVID, we were able to pay $10 an hour, um, and have an unlimited supply of labor. By the time COVID was kind of done, we were starting at 15 an hour. We had to offer full medical benefits, a 401, put in a 401k, and we were very generous in our time off policy, and we couldn't get we had a hell of a time even hiring at 15 an hour. So I think now that company has had to, I think now they're hiring at like closer to 20 an hour. And so what's happening is the lower end wages are getting bumped up, but then you have the skilled wages are staying pretty stagnant. So where you had a guy that might have a lot of skills was making say $30 an hour, well that was pretty good pay when people were making 10 down here. But now that these guys are getting bumped up, this people aren't getting bumped up as much. So the skilled labor's really hurting. But in general, I would say, okay, when we go back to the borders, the United States needs workers. We need unskilled workers, we need skilled workers, and we need to vet who comes through the border, make sure they don't have criminal backgrounds, be able to keep track of them, and let them be productive members in society. Most of the people I talk to that have family that have crossed the border into the United States, the U.S. government's not allowing them to work. So it's against they'll get thrown in jail for working. So they're not allowed to take American jobs, but at the same time, there's like this pack or what do you call it, NGO money that's going to give them housing, give them food, all that kind of stuff. So they're getting government handouts, but they're not allowed to work. And I was listening to something the other day, and they said that all those handouts are getting ready to stop, and you're going to have civil war break out very soon in the United States because you got 30 million illegal people there that have been getting government money. If you take that away completely, then what are they going to do? They're going to have to find a way to make money. So it's a really interesting scenario. But I agree you have to control your borders. I think every person with a intelligence above 100 IQ would say you have to like definition of a country. Part of that is you have to control who comes into your borders. The thing that's scary to me is because I was in the military, is the United States used to be a very loved country, but we've been on the wrong side of almost every war and conflict since World War II. We've amassed enemies from all over the world. There's a lot of people that really hate the United States, like badly hate the United States. And there's probably 50 to 100,000 of them now living in the United States because we've left our borders open and haven't done any vetting. So that's the scary thing, I think.
I want to jump back really quick, and then I just wrote down a question, kind of that last part. But when you saw the wage increases, was that inflation? Was that, or was that demographic change?
It was, I believe it was due to all of the money that the government was offering to not work, right? So the government was offering a shit ton of money to people to not work. I can't remember exactly what the payouts were, but people were making more than $10 an hour during that time not to work. So they were like, why would I go to work? And then, if you look at the Social Security data, you have a lot more people drawing Social Security disability today. Like another 2 million during COVID went on disability. So so now they're getting that handout, plus they're getting probably food stamps, which are just a credit card now, and other low rent housing options. So my thought, and Dr. Phil actually did a special on it. I don't know if you've seen it on social media, but it's going around. But like if you look at the bottom, I think it's like 60% of the U.S. earners. So you look at the bottom 20, the next 20, the next 20. The bottom 20 make more than that don't work, make more than the next 20% that do work, and the bottom 20, when you factor in things like you don't need daycare, you're not spending money on gas to go back and forth to work, then that bottom 20% is making more than even the next 40 to 60% of the earners. And so that's a problem. That's a big problem. It's solvable, but I mean that's a big problem. People have no incentive to work. I mean, not really.
Is that like, it's hard to imagine that if someone has a sixth grade math education, it's really hard to not come to the conclusion, even going back to what you had said earlier, where illegals are coming in, put on government handouts, and then not allowed to work. I mean, it's really hard to not find the conclusion that there is an in there. It's not just, an incentive structure to cause dependency, but it's like really hard to not imagine that it's not deliberately causing as much dependency as possible.
Yeah, my personal view is that these elites that run the world have been high on Western civilization for the past, I don't know, 70 years. And for whatever reason, maybe it's probably because they're now in so much debt, these Western civilizations. But for whatever reason, it's like the elites have given up on Western civilization, and it feels like they're deliberately trying to destroy it. So, I talk about the divisiveness a lot between people in the United States, but it's the same thing, in every country in Western civilization, that the media is constantly splitting the population. So it's white males are the problem, or it's Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter is a really good example of how you had one issue, police brutality, that 100% of the people could have got behind, and then we made it into a race issue. And we got the LGBTQ stuff. We've got everything, and then we got businesses and corporations are to blame for the problem, and you have all of this noise. And I tell people the real enemy is the U.S. government, and the politicians may just be puppets, but they're still making really bad decisions. And it's the elites that are behind them that are really the ones. We'll never see the elites. We'll never know who that is. They're probably the people that own the Federal Reserves in every other country, or in every country in the world. But if you ever try to find out who owns the Federal Reserves, that's a cluster that that's a Rubik's Cube you'll never solve. I don't, have you ever looked at the ownership of the Federal Reserve banks?
Yeah, a little bit, a little bit. Just the story of how America got to where America is phenomenal. And I think you can't look at it as like a linear chain of events. I don't know how much you know about project management, but it's so much more like a Kanban, or like a Scrum, which Scrum is just like like taking very complex issues and having independent teams work on problems, and it's just the most efficient way for project management for them to do that without interfering with each other, but still being able to solve problems. So if you look at how America got to where America is in a linear fashion, it just seems so incoherent. I can't remember the knot that Alexander the Great cut in half. It just seems like this just unwindable knot. But if you look at it much more like pieces of a puzzle, it makes so much more sense, and it seems fairly deliberate.
That's what it felt like to me. It's like everything that's happening feels like it's deliberate. It's the, not holding criminals accountable in San Francisco. It's allowing homeless people to sleep wherever they want and defecate and use drugs wherever they want. It's like it's a conscious effort to let that stuff go. But yeah, it feels like the U.S. is being deliberately destroyed. It's not random. It's kind of like with one of the big. There's two big things that happened with the de-dollarization. Huge, right? Part of it was the loss of the petrodollar, which happened in, I think, the first 6 months of Biden's presidency. The second was the loss of the SWIFT system to be the only way to transfer money from one country to another. So BRICS solved the SWIFT issue, and the United States lost the petrodollar. I don't know if people are aware of this. A lot of people don't stay up on the news, but the U.S. had the petrodollar in place since Nixon, because Nixon agreed to basically provide military protection and weaponry to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia said, okay, you do that, and we'll forever trade all oil, all OPEC oil will be traded in U.S. dollars only. And so I think it was like the first 6 months Biden was in office, the relationship with Saudi Arabia was so bad, Saudi Arabia tore that agreement up and signed a new agreement with Russia. And so the agreement was, well, Russia will now provide them military aid, and they can trade dollar or trade oil now in whatever currencies they want. And I can tell you for certain, every one of the OPEC nations are trying to not use any dollars. They're trying to make it illegal to use dollars to trade in any oil. So those two things, you would say, man, our government was really stupid to allow those two things to happen. And the only conclusion I can come to is it wasn't stupidity, it was intentional. It was intentional. So they were maybe smarter than what we think, and they're deliberately trying to destroy the United States. And those were two big things that happened, that they allowed to happen, or they made happen. They put everything in motion to allow those things to happen. So I don't think they were an accident or something that just happened.
Yeah, and I don't think the thing with BRICS that people are not paying attention to, and that's kind of what I was getting at with even the creation of the Federal Reserve, right, and the Bretton Woods Agreement, and all of these different things. When you look at it linearly, it's like trying to find that agrarian. No, I can't remember the knot, but it would make more sense if I could actually think of the name. But when you try to follow that knot, it's like you can't, right? If you've ever gotten a knot in your shoelaces, it drives you nuts. And that's what a knot does, right? But if you look at it like pieces of the puzzle, even going back to like the rise of the Soviet Union after World War II, why do we not teach or talk about that whatsoever? That like dominated for 50 years all foreign policy. And every single decision that our security apparatus made was based on counteracting them, including a lot of agreements we're still in today, like NATO, right? Okay, so now let's look at BRICS, but this is just the axis of evil. But then you have to look at it and you go, wait a minute, why is India in there? They're fairly neutral, and they don't even like China. It's because their mutual agreement is that the United States has weaponized their dollars 50 times too many times, right? So it is getting to a weird place. One thing I wanted to ask about was, what was the inflation like in Mexico? So in Japan, they are straight Weimaring their currency. It's unbelievable to see products. It might not be like Zimbabwe or the Weimar Republic, but in real time, we are watching products in the grocery store go up. Not a little bit, a lot. To the point that me and my wife bought a year's worth of rice as an investment. Not for food security and starve to death. Conspiracy crazy people. But like literally it was like, this just will save us $200 if we just buy a year's worth of rice and keep it in the closet, right? Like just as an investment alone, right? What was that like in Mexico?
It felt non-existent. So I mean, living here for the last 2 years, you don't see things more expensive. I get street tacos and I pay like, I don't know, 25 pesos for a street taco, and they were 25 pesos 2 years ago. They're still 25 pesos, and they didn't take any meat out. It's the same amount of meat. The eggs are the same. Eggs are the same price. Eggs, bread, milk. I mean, everything's still relatively the same price. I think Mexico reported somewhere between 3 and 5% for the last 4 or 5 years for inflation, but you don't see big changes in grocery bills. I know in the U.S. I'm hearing people like that once ordered on Amazon a year ago are paying almost double for things a year later, and they've got their previous Amazon order to support, the inflation that they're seeing. So what I think is happening is the United States is suffering through. Well, I know it's happening because I've compared it to gold. So one of the things that's interesting with the U.S. dollar is when it came off the gold standard, it still tracked with gold from 1976 until about 2006, six-ish. They tracked pretty much together. So if you go back and you look at gold prices and how much it went up from year to year, and you look at the inflation that the government reported, they were very aligned. It was a one-to-one correlation. And then starting about 2006, it became worse. But from 2006 to 2023 or 20, yeah, end of 23, instead of being a one-to-one relationship, it was a one-to-two relationship. So for every 2%, every 2% the gold increased, they would report 1% for the dollar. So since 2006, our inflation has been double what the government is reporting. And that's why things are getting so much more expensive. And then that's accelerating now. So that, I think 24 is probably going to come in at 3 or 4 times what was reported based on the price of gold. And so I get people that say, why would you compare the dollar to gold? And it's like, well, if you're going to really look at inflation, instead of looking at a bucket of products that the federal government thinks we should be looking at, that they change, constantly, there's no better marker of inflation than gold. So if somebody has a better idea for what you can compare it to besides gold, I'd love to hear that argument. But there's no better tool to compare inflation to than gold. And so all you got to do is look at what's reported, look at what gold prices are, and you're like, wow, our dollar's not worth 1/10 what it was 20 years ago. It's worth 1/20th what it was 20 years ago. So
One thing Michael Saylor talks about quite a bit in Bitcoin and the crypto world is when inflation hits, even when it's low, right at their targeted numbers of 3%, a year, which people don't realize, that means in 25 years your dollar's cut in half. So it's not small to say 3% a year, right? Which people kind of blow off as small. But one of his biggest points is, since the 70s, 80s, when we really started to see the financial markets deregulation and different things like that, kind of reconfigure, for lack of better words, this amorphous kind of what I was talking about with the knot, these things that just seem so convoluted. He had talked about like all of the inflation it wasn't gone, and they weren't hitting a 3%. It was just inflating asset prices, and we have been brainwashed into thinking that's a good thing, but it's not. We have just inflated asset prices throughout. In Mexico, when you saw inflation numbers that were so small, but real estate rising and land rising, was the inflation just shuffling into, like you've said things like, there are prime real estate that will be on par with the United States very soon, right? That's where my fear goes in, is that the inflation is just simply being funneled into asset prices in Mexico. Am I off when I say that?
Yeah, I don't think that's where it's. I mean, it's true that property values are, since I've been here, have went up about 10% each year, which is pretty good. But it appears more to be driven by supply and demand than anything else, because you know, I know people in the West don't want to believe it, but a lot of people are moving to Mexico, and a lot of people prefer living in Mexico over their Western countries. So whether you're, Canadians, Australians, pretty much the ones I see from Western civilization are U.S., Canadian, and Australians. But to a person, they all prefer living here, and then they tell their friends and family, and eventually you get more people interested in moving here. And so the supply and demand is what's not in sync, and that's it's close, but that's what's driving up the prices, I believe.
What I'm most interested in is, especially now because of trends of the economy, and it's not your forte per se, where you have explicitly said, I'm not much of an acquirer. I don't really want to acquire businesses, but my passion is to build them from scratch. But for me, I love acquiring. It's my skill set of project management, works perfectly into systems that already exist. What are you seeing as opportunity in the acquisition space within Mexico of pre-existing businesses that might already have some infrastructure in place?
I think I see more opportunity. I'm going to divert your question probably, but I'm not. I don't have visibility enough to know what acquisitions would make sense. I know there's a Chinese manufacturer that does the foam concrete blocks that are significantly lighter. They're wanting to expand here, so they're selling manufacturing plants for like $3.5 million. If somebody wants to come in here and start one of those, they'll build it for them. That's a good opportunity. The biggest opportunity I see, I think, is basically, you're familiar with Alibaba, right? So that doesn't exist in Mexico. There's no Alibaba in Mexico. And when I was going through the MBA program at Ohio State, we were doing trips to China, and they were doing courses on how do you get products from China into the United States. So how do you get all the manufacturing done? Who does the Victoria's Secret's made there. Most of the weight equipment is made there. I mean, tons of stuff are made in China. And so we actually had college trips to China to meet with manufacturers to figure out, how to get things done and, where to go. So that whole piece is missing. So you got Mexico, the largest manufacturer, exporting into the United States, and there's no Alibaba system to make the process easier, and there's no colleges coming to Mexico to learn about that. So I think there's a huge opportunity there. I know there's at least one company I know that's working on that. But as far as like buying and merging, I mean, that's out of my expertise. I'm not. I'm looking at new businesses. So like I'm doing the MLS, right? Because there's no MLS here, and then after that, I'm probably going to do um, like when I rent cars, you can rent a car here for like say 500 a month, but then they want you to pay, I don't know, $70 a day, so another $2,100 for insurance. So the car cost 500, the insurance cost 2,100. If you had a company come in here that would say, okay, we're going to insure you for say double what they charge in the US. So say it's like $300 to get insurance full coverage on a car, then that company is going to do extremely well, and everybody's going to be somewhat happy that they can get low cost insurance that covers them. So I'm fixated on opportunities of creating businesses, not necessarily merging them together. So I'm trying to think, but nothing's coming to my head at the moment.
So I was recently in Taipei, in Taiwan, literally like a week and a half ago. And part of the reason was for the obvious geopolitical reasons that when I go stateside, I don't necessarily know how long that will be as much of an opportunity, and also to kind of scout it out a little bit. And one thing that really, I could imagine it used to be this way, but man, long before I was on this earth. But in America, it probably used to be this whole made in America concept, but long before me, where I was. It's funny because everything is made in China and everything is made in Taiwan. It seems, right? All the little trinkets we use, and it was very weird to me to be in Taipei, and just as like a micro example, that we would go to, like, I don't know, we went to like the Taipei Zoo for my little boy, and you go to the gift shop, and everything in the gift shop from the Taipei Zoo says made in Taiwan. Now there's a few things made in China, but most of it is made in Taiwan on this little island. So it's like self-sustaining in that way. Is Mexico that way, or is it like America where everything is foreign import?
Um, well, let me back up. The U.S. used to be that way. So when I was a kid, I remember I was in Michigan. I was probably 5 years old, and I saw a baseball that was made in Japan, and it was the first foreign, thing that I had seen. And at the time, everything in Japan was viewed as extremely cheap and not well made. And there was a pride on everything being made in America. Levi's were made in America. I mean, your shoes were made in America. I mean, everything was pretty much made in America. And there was a pride with that. Um, in Mexico, I don't know that people pay attention. I certainly don't pay a lot of attention. I mean, you definitely have a big Chinese influence here. China has figured out, like, we have NAFTA with the United States and Canada, and Mexico. I don't know what kind of agreement China has with Mexico, but I think it's better than what the U.S. has, because if you want to get products, say, from Amazon U.S. into Mexico, good luck. Most of it's not available. If it is available, it's going to be expensive, or it's going to take forever. You order something from China, and it doesn't matter anywhere in China. Like, it doesn't matter if you're ordering from Alibaba, AliExpress, Shein, or any other site. They have that stuff here like within 7 days delivered to you, and you're paying, like, my girlfriend's buying like bikinis for like $10, and they're friggin' nice. They're nicely made. So, I think Mexico, they're making a lot of things here. A lot of that's going to the U.S. There's probably more of what they're making going to the U.S. than what stays. Although a lot of the cars are, I think, being made here now, and there's a lot more cars on the road, because that middle class is growing. But I don't know. That would be my perspective. I think is it's not a Taiwan, and it's not like an old United States. There's a lot of national pride in in Mexico. So, like, right now, everybody in the United States thinks that their Cinco de Mayo is their Independence Day, but their Independence Day is actually coming up. It's I don't know why they think it's Cinco de Mayo, but yeah, they celebrate Cinco de Mayo in the U.S. You and I had no idea why. But their Independence Day is coming up, and you see people selling flags all over. Like, you'll stop at a stoplight, and you'll have guys trying to make extra money that are coming out, offering to to sell the Mexican flag. And so in Mexico, you have a lot of nationalism, a lot of pride. You can fly the flag, and you're not a racist. In the United States, most people that are flying their flags are considered racist. So it's nationalism strong. It's just made in Mexico. I don't see as that strong.
Does that worry you at all, the influence of China within Mexico? So we talked about the corruption a little bit with the government, and that kind of is what it is. And I've heard you say multiple times, same thing with the cartel, is that it's kind of its own lane. They kind of, people keep to themselves, right? And it's kind of like separate. It's almost like a separate government, right? And it's kind of its own thing in a lot of ways. But the influence of China, does that for people looking to invest into Mexico, does that concern or anything?
I don't. I mean, I don't see it as a concern, because I mean, it depends, I guess, on your perspective. But I don't personally see it as a concern. I see that as a good thing for Mexico, because they have, it's not just the United States that's coming in here. Because right now, to be honest, the biggest risk to Mexico is the United States. The United States is such a big part of their operation. I mean, the United States, I just saw a number today that they're expecting $600 billion of manufactured goods to go from Mexico to the United States this year. Mexico's
Wait,
GDP,
you mean oh, finished product? Okay, I
yeah.
thought you were talking about the transfer of. Oh, wow. Okay.
So they're saying finished product is 600 billion going from Mexico to the United States. Mexico's GDP is 2 trillion. So you're talking almost 30% of the GDP is just trade with the United States, and that doesn't include all the tourism and all everything else. So the biggest risk in Mexico is by far the stability of the United States. So I think the more investments you see from China, from Europe, from Russia, from other countries here, that shores up Mexico from having all of its eggs in the same basket. So I think it actually makes them stronger.
So if and I know there's a million details that I quite honestly am not just going to share online in that way, but knowing that what me and my wife, what I talked about a little bit earlier, sharing passports and so on, and we are really heavily looking into South America at the moment, probably more than I would, yeah. Would you recommend like taking a good hard look at Mexico, or would you say look at the El Salvador, the Panama, the Argentina first?
Well, I think I'll have a citizenship in Mexico and Argentina within the next 5 years. So if that answers your question, because I think the more passports you can have, the better, in my opinion, right now. But I think it's important to get citizenship in Mexico, and it's important to get citizenship in another country as well. So I think Argentina will be the other country I get citizenship in.
What are the visa situations like in Mexico? I think at one point, so like Japan for a tourist visa is 90 days. That's pretty standard across the EU and the UK as well. I think you said 180 days.
Yeah, it's
Was
180
it in
days.
Mexico? That's like 6 months.
Yeah, so a lot of people don't even get residency. They live here and then they just fly back every 6 months. So, like, in Playa del Carmen, for instance, there's probably, I don't know, 750,000 people or so, and over 50,000 of the people in Playa are from Argentina. You also have a large population from Canada, from the United States, from Italy here, and Russia. There's probably another 50,000, close to 50,000 Russians that are Russian-speaking people that live here. They could be from Ukraine or Belarus or other areas. But you have a very strong mix of different people here that people don't realize.
I could not agree more. We are trying to look into legalities quite a lot. Japan does not allow dual citizenship under any even when you're born as a dual citizen, they make you choose at 18 years old. Now they don't double check, wink wink, but they make you choose. So if they catch you, they force you to give one of them up. So we're looking at a lot right now and bringing people on for that regard. So I will really truly probably sooner than you think keep you in mind when it comes to when we start diving deep into Mexico in the future there. Kind of a left field question that I wanted to ask before I kind of do a rapid fire type thing would be, are you spiritual? Do you have faith? Does faith play into anything that you're trying to do in the message you're trying to get out? Or
I would view I'm very spiritual. One of the tattoos I have is it's a symbol of unity. So I'm very spiritual. What I would say, I believe that all people on the planet are pretty much praying to the same God. And so whether you're a Muslim, a Jew, a Christian, a Buddha, a Hindu, you're all pretty much following the same path, and praying to the same God. And so from that standpoint, I believe everybody's much more connected than what most people think. Yeah, I was in the Navy and I was exposed to people from all over the world with different religions, and there's a lot of really good people that are different religions, and I could not envision a scenario where somebody goes before God to get into heaven and they say, God's like, you lived a really good life. You treated everybody just like they should have been treated. You didn't commit one sin in your entire life. But, you chose the wrong religion, so down you go. So I don't think that's realistic, and so the only conclusion I can come to is we're probably all praying to the same God, and we're going to be judged based on what we do in this world, not what religion we supported. That's my personal view.
Makes total sense. And I know you're probably, it is what it is to hear it at this point, but thank you for your service in the Navy. Got a lot of family in the military. So at one time that was quite meaningful. But so I'll do a quick rapid fire here. I've stolen a little extra time and more time than I anticipated. Thank you. But general rapid fire here. You mentioned Playa, Tulum. You mentioned multiple places. You're choosing one spot that someone needs to like really dive into the nitty gritty if they wanted to go into the Mexico, economy. Where are they at?
Yeah, I think right now the best investment is in Tulum, um, because I see Tulum is kind of a chaotic mess right now. But every major city in Mexico has a development plan, and I finally have seen the development plan in Tulum. And with the airport that they put in, with the train station they put in, the train Mayan train goes in there. The new international airport is there now, and then they also put in a huge national park and they're opening up some beach access with parking and everything into there. Because right now, one of the bad things in Tulum is getting beach access is very difficult. You have to basically go to a beach club. Parking is expensive. Taxis are expensive. The beach club's expensive. So you can't go to the beach. There's a tiny public beach, but it really sucks. And so with this new Jaguar Park, they're calling it, I believe it's like 3 or 4 times the size of Central Park in New York City. Um, it's just a huge park. So I think long term, Tulum is the place. I think if you're going to move here and you're looking for the best bang for your buck, then Cancun is your best target. I mean, I've seen some like 3 bedroom condos in Tulum that are going for almost half the price, just over half the price of what they would sell for in Tulum. So Cancun is going to get you the best value. And then personally, I think if you're looking for the best place to live right now, it's Playa. But in 10 years, it'll probably be Tulum. So that's kind of how I see things.
Somebody wants to. They're like, you sold me on Mexico. I'm tired of the shit. Pardon my French, but literally on the streets and the homelessness. I'm tired of this. You sold me. What's their first step?
The first, what I tell people, because I get asked this question a lot, it happens more than you would think. Um, and what I tell them is, Mexico is a very big and diverse country. I chose Playa del Carmen, but the downside of Playa del Carmen is in this whole area is it's hot and there's a lot of humidity. And there's not really a big city atmosphere. It's a smaller city atmosphere. So some people really like big cities. And so Polanco is one of the areas of Mexico City. It's one of the most exclusive areas in the world. I mean, it's not cheap by any means, but it's absolutely beautiful. I mean, it's like basically living in a forest with high rises sprinkled throughout it. And then you have, Cabo, and basically the whole west coast where you don't have the humidity like you have out here. In my opinion, I really like the cenotes. I really like the ocean in the Caribbean here because it's just the most beautiful sea that you've ever seen. Where you don't have that on the west coast in Cabo or Mazatlan or Acapulco or anything. So, and then you have big cities like Guadalajara, Monterrey, and you have mountain towns. Like there's a place called San Miguel de Allende, and there's San Cristobal. There's a few places that are mountain towns, and they're just beautiful. So, what I tell people is try to figure out if you're a city person, a mountain person, a beach person, and then go to a few of those locations, go to a few of those cities, go to a few of those, beaches, mountains, whatever. And, one of them may call out to you and say, you know what, this is where you belong. And if that's where you belong, then pick that one. But I would definitely, you know, try to spend as much time as you can in several different areas until you find what you like. And if you need advice, with how to get a hold of a realtor or anything like that, or residency, then just message me and I'll do what I can to help you.
Sweet. And any general final words or anything?
Try to pay attention, I mean, to what's going on in the world and live your life, in a spot that's going to protect you the best from it. And the other thing I guess I would end with would be, I don't watch professional sports any longer. I don't watch baseball. I don't watch baseball. I don't watch football. I don't watch basketball. I'll still watch hockey occasionally. I'll still watch MMA. The reason I don't watch those major sports that I used to watch is because they all need to the flag. They all took a knee when the U.S. when we were playing the anthem. As a wartime veteran, I was very, very alarmed and disappointed and hurt by seeing all that, I suppose. So I will not support those again. So that's why I don't watch those things. So I would say I think it's important for people to follow their their beliefs, inside the church and outside the church, so to speak. So if you believe one thing and your sports team is proposing another thing, then you need to either find a different sport or a different team because your values need to align with what you do in life, whether you're doing business, your family, the movies you watch, I mean, it all needs to align. And I think you'll have more comfort if you can get alignment with all of that instead of, supporting people that, you know, there's certain actors I won't go see on the movie. I won't even watch their TV shows. I just don't. It's like I would prefer everybody to be non-political, especially people that are in acting and sports roles. But it seems like everybody wants to be political, and if they want to be political, then you should support them such or not support them such.
I think those are pretty good parting words. Common sense, common knowledge isn't so common anymore and quite revolutionary. How fast things are changing, it won't be boring when we do a part two, right? Like there will be more developments and more infrastructure probably put in place. It sounds like, I'm pretty in tune with some things, and I try to keep my international perspective, especially with Southeast Asia and being here and I'm more than most. But I think you really open my eyes to much the progression of where Mexico is going, particularly south of the border in South America, is, I think, far more rapid than even I realized. So I think for most people, light years. Well, beautiful. Well, thank you again for your time.